Hi, good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Thanks. Good morning. My name is Melody Kaiser. I am the Director of Patient Engagement for Cure LBSL. I'm also the co-chair of the GLIA-CTN Advocacy Committee, and I'm here today to talk to you about making informed decisions and what that looks like. Dr. Eichler primed the conversation by talking about the importance of risk-benefit analysis after gene therapy, and here I am to tell you how to do it. So I have a couple of handouts that I'm going to be referencing, and this lovely table has offered to hand them out to you, so we'll be getting to them in a couple of slides, but I just wanted to introduce myself. The first thing that I want to say is that informed consent is not a document. When you ask somebody what's informed consent, they're like, oh, that's the 50-page paper we have to sign when we go in and start a clinical trial or when we consent to get medical treatment. I'm not talking about the informed consent document. That's more of a legal representation or documentation of a conversation. I'm talking about informed consent in the capacity of giving consent. It's an ongoing process. You're giving permission to do an intervention. You're giving permission to proceed forward after you've had a conversation where you're able to weigh the risks and benefits. It's based on mutual trust. It's based on transparency, and it's ongoing. It's not a one-time, one and done. I told you something, you signed the paper, we're good. Just a quick clarification, for those of you who've participated in research, you may have seen the word consent, where more of a legal, like the adult signs it, versus assent for minors or people who are unable to give legal consent. So just to clarify, for the purposes of my presentation, I'm talking about somebody's decision-making capacity and their ability to share their opinions and understand. So if you hear both of those words, I'm just going to be saying consent, but it could apply to a child or a minor's understanding of what's going on as well. And we're going to be talking about interventions, and that intervention could be anything. I'm going to give a couple of examples, and I would love for this group, we've got a nice intimate group, I'd love for this group to just shout out some other ideas of what an intervention could be. And so I just pulled up Merriam-Webster's definition of an intervention of if you go to the A definition, it says the act of interfering with the outcome or course, especially of a condition or process, as to prevent harm or improve functioning. So that seems like a really good definition for our purposes. So let me just give a couple of intervention examples, and maybe this group could throw out a few more of things where you've been asked for your permission for yourself or for your child. Would you like to take these vitamins? How about physical therapy? Try some melatonin for sleep. Those are all interventions. There's a goal, and you're trying to do something to improve outcome of the condition or to prevent harm. Can anybody in the group share out some other interventions that maybe you've been exposed to or requested for yourself or for your child? It doesn't have to be anything super fancy. No interventions? Well, genetic testing, fantastic. That's a huge, that's a complicated one because it gets deeper. Some of them are very easy. Like, do you want to take this vitamin or not? There's fewer conversation questions. Genetic testing, that's more complicated. So you may have a conversation with a professional, a genetic counselor to really have that conversation. It's because it is more nuanced. That's a great one. Anybody else want to throw anyone out? That's huge. That's absolutely huge. The response was putting somebody on life support. That's an enormous intervention. And that's going to segue beautifully into my next slide, which is what is the goal of the intervention? What are you trying to achieve? For some people, putting them on a life support, which is a very big decision, a very big intervention, maybe it's buying some time for something else to happen with the hope of some recovery. Maybe it's buying time because it's not time to let go yet. That's very complicated. For other decisions, it may be a lot easier, but the general idea is to start before any intervention, like, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? Why are we doing this? With physical therapy, we're looking at that, saying hi to Jen. Physical therapy, what's our goal? We're trying to improve function. We're trying to help with balance. I'm sure you literally document all of your goals for each person, and that's part of your care plan. And for other people, like you said, for life support, if it's an end of life situation, but it's life support to buy a little more time or to prepare to say goodbye, that's a different goal than keep them alive long enough for some other intervention to come and hopefully be more a treatment option. So very important to think about what are your goals. And what's really important about this slide is to think that there's lots of people on your care team, and your care team includes, if you think of the patient in the center and you picture concentric circles around them, your care team includes family members or spouses or siblings or who's part of this in addition to your medical care team. And does everybody have the same goal? And when people don't all have the same goal, that's where the conflict comes in. And that's where the entire profession of bioethics comes in, to help deal with some of those conflicts and to help guide families along with social workers and other professionals to make those decisions, really hard decisions. But if you think about the goal as the first step, it'll help guide your conversation. We're keeping this session very high level, just introduction to having those conversations and thinking about where you fit in this process, and where you fit is right in the center. You have the right to ask these questions. You have the right to engage in these conversations, and I'm hoping at the end of this, my goal at the end of this session is to give you confidence and the language to have these conversations. So that's my goal for standing up here. And I'm going to tell you about some of the risks and benefits of standing up here in just a moment. So I love this. This is the brain, what's the word I'm looking for? Mnemonic, is one that I've used in lots of different areas, and it's wonderful that it's perfect for neurology and it's perfect for leukodystrophy. So it should be easy to remember to use your brain when you're trying to have these informed consent conversations or making decisions. This can be, again, for gene therapy, like major trials, or it could be for something minor like, do I want to participate in something? Do I want to go to summer camp? Do I want, whatever you're thinking about, what are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the alternatives? What does your intuition say? And then numbers, we'll talk about that in a second. So I just want to go through all of them a little bit. But before I do that, does anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far? I would really love for this to be a dialogue, so please interrupt at any time. It makes it a lot more interesting when people have questions or comments. Thinking with the goals in mind of what you're trying to do, what would be the benefits of an intervention? So let me, what good could arise from something? So for example, I'm going to use the vaccine example, because we're all pretty well familiar with vaccines recently, and it's relevant, but it's not loaded, so maybe it's a little loaded. But benefits, you think about what good could happen if I got vaccinated. I could prevent illness, I could prevent others from getting sick, lots of good reasons for vaccines. But there's also risks. There's risks of receiving the vaccine, but there's also risks of not receiving the vaccine. So when you're thinking about risks, I want you to split it, to think about what would happen if I did the intervention, but also what would happen if I didn't do the intervention. So you get the vaccine, and then this is where the goals and the conflicts come in, right? So my background is in public health before I was working in the leukodystrophy space. As a public health professional, my goals are different than an individual's goals when it comes to vaccines, right? Like, I'm looking at it from a different perspective. And so I'm talking to you about the benefits of why you should get the vaccine, and maybe you're worrying about the risks for yourself. And then we're coming at it from different goals, and so we might have a little conflict, and maybe that's where some of the problems come when people aren't people seem like they're talking past each other sometimes in vaccine conversations. So think about the risks for yourself, and the risks of doing the intervention, but also the risks of not doing the intervention. Okay. Alternatives. This is my favorite one. This is me. This is like my entire personality in one word is alternatives. I'm always like, what else could we try? There's got to be another solution. I don't like choice A. I don't like choice B. What's choice C? Not going to get into politics, but you can imagine there are people who are looking for an alternative or a choice C in certain situations, and that's me. And if I could give an example from my own personal life, from the Kennedy Krieger Institute, my son has, among other challenges, he has a lifelong sleep disorder, and we were at the Kennedy Krieger sleep clinic for many years and getting really great care, and he was just taking melatonin, and it was working. And then puberty. That changes everything. And then anxiety about starting middle school, and that really changes everything. And all of a sudden, the kid's not sleeping anymore. So we went back to the sleep clinic, and we said, what's next? And I didn't like what was next, because what was next in the medical arsenal, I was not okay with the side effects for my 11-year-old. I wasn't okay with the potential for dependency for my 11-year-old. And I said, there's got to be some other alternative. Please just think outside the box. Help me figure something out. And Dr. Ricardo, who was the sleep doctor at the time, said, well, I did just read this really interesting paper where they had kids take the melatonin, but then they also had them take a small animal, like a furry cat or a little tiny dog, and that animal went into bed with them, and it was their job. You told them, don't tell them it's time to go to sleep. You don't have to go to sleep, you can stay up all night you want, but it's your job to help that animal fall asleep. And in the process of calming the animal and petting that soft, sweet little furry thing with no anxiety about having to go to bed, because you can stay up all night, you can watch TV till 3 in the morning, calm the animal, and guess what? The melatonin works and out you go. And what an amazing intervention. Now, my husband would disagree in the risk department because we now have a Pomeranian that he does not want. But everybody else is very happy with this plan, and my son slept. And it hit the reset button for him. So then the anxiety of going to bed reduced because he wasn't fearing that he was going to be up all night because he couldn't sleep, and all of a sudden we had a fabulous intervention that solved our problem and bridged the gap until the anxiety went down from starting middle school and it's okay and it's good, and we were able to move on with life. And so it's pretty fantastic from my perspective. My husband, not so much, different goals. So he did not want that Pomeranian. Okay. Intuition. This one, I know, I'm looking in this audience, I know a couple of faces, and I know a few of you are going to nod and agree with me that this is the most important thing on my whole list. What your gut tells you is the most important thing, and do not second guess your gut. You can talk yourself out of it very easily. You can be like, this doesn't feel right, but if your gut is telling you that this is wrong, this is not the right time, doesn't feel good, don't dismiss yourself, don't gaslight yourself, walk it through. You may eventually make a decision, but don't dismiss that intuition. It's too powerful, and especially I see a lot of moms in the room, and you know it's too powerful. You know yourself, you know your child. And then the final number, depending on where you are, where you're hearing about the use of your brain, you may hear it as no, like don't forget you can say no, or not now, like it's okay to say this isn't the right time, we'll revisit this later. For this group, I put in the N to be numbers, because I think especially in the leukodystrophy community where it's so rare, those numbers can be incredibly powerful in helping you make your decision. So for example, I was in another session yesterday, the Vanishing White Matter session, and one of the dads was talking about the challenge of consenting to enroll his daughters in a clinical trial. Like, how scary is that? But he had confidence because there had been 200 participants in the phase 1 part of the trial where he felt confident that the drug was not going to cause significant harm to his child because of those numbers. What if it had been 100? What if it had been 20? I don't know. Maybe 5 would have been enough. Somebody has tried it. Nobody wants to be the first, right? And so that number is going to vary for what your personal risk assessment is, but having that can help. Or having data, having something that you can point to say, okay, I feel comfortable with my decision because of these numbers or because of this data. And data is also the language of the researchers and scientists, so that's a really great communication connection with them sometimes, is to say, like, show me the stats, let's talk. Okay, so you all have handouts now, and this QR code, for those of you who are virtual, you're welcome to scan this QR code to see. This is actually an informed consent document, informed consent questions that I previously made many years ago when I was a childbirth educator for a health system. And it was just really helping women in birth to have the questions, because it's obviously a very stressful time when you're giving birth, and sometimes you're not thinking fully or you're not able to form the questions that you're looking for. So I had put this together. Obviously, some of these are not going to apply in the situation right now, but you can modify them for your situation. Once you have goals and brain as your starting point, you can modify the questions to fit, but at least you have some sense of what you might ask. And so I'm just going to read some of them, or just to go through. One of the first questions that I have people ask is, hold on, is this an emergency or do we have time to talk? because something may feel rushed or urgent, and it may not actually be an emergency. It may be that there's 50 people waiting in the waiting room and this clinic is already 3 hours late and they need you to make a decision because there's other people waiting, and that's wonderful for for a quick decision, but not for, for something that you're pondering. And so you can say, wait, hold on, this isn't an emergency, we need some time. Sometimes it is an emergency and you do need to act quickly, but if it's not a true emergency, you should be able to get some more time. Again, what are the goals? That's such a critical part. And then go right through there, the benefits, risks, alternatives, intuition, and no or not now or numbers. If you say, no, I don't consent, the next question that I would ask is, if we don't do this intervention, or if I don't agree to what you're proposing, what's the next step? What likely consequences could there be? And that may be very significant, and maybe that helps you change your mind, or it might be something that you're comfortable with. For those of you who've given birth, you may in your Lamaze class have heard about the cascade of interventions. Does that sound familiar? Yes, you've heard it before. Has anybody else heard that phrase? Cascade of interventions is this concept that if you start one intervention, it leads to another, and it leads to another. Picture like a waterfall. Like, in birth it would be like, okay, if you consent to monitoring, now you're in bed, and now you have more pain, so then you're going to get more pain medication, and now you have more pain medication, and now they up it, and now you can't get out of bed, so now you have a catheter, and now you can't, and there's intervention after intervention after intervention after intervention that started with the first one. And so thinking about that too, like if I consent to what intervention you're speaking about, what's next? Is something else going to happen? But also what's not on this card, because it wasn't as relevant to birth, but I think would be really relevant to you, would be the reverse. If I consent to this intervention, are any doors going to close for me? And so going back to some of these clinical trials or these drug trials, if I consent to participate in this research, does that exclude me from future research? If I take this intervention, am I now shut out of another intervention? And so that's a really important part of the conversation is, if I say yes, what's likely to happen, and what do I know? Nobody would want to be surprised. Could you imagine if you consented to something and you went all the way through goals and brain and everything, only to find out that there was something significant you didn't know in the conversation. Something was kept back. Evidence-based research, again, that's speaking the language of the researchers and the doctors. If you have questions, say, what does the evidence say? What's out there? It's always okay to ask for a second opinion if it's not an immediate emergency. Sometimes you just don't have time for a second opinion, but if you can and you're feeling uncomfortable, you can get that second opinion. And sometimes a second opinion just makes you more confident in your decision. That person and you agree and you talk and you say that the first recommendation was right, that's what we're going with. And sometimes it gives you more options or more things to think about. And then to my profession, you can always request a bioethics consultation. I wouldn't do that for every decision, but if you're having a tough time deciding, or if you're thinking about a really heavy decision, that's where bioethics can come in. And going back to the example of life support, I would really hope that a bioethics professional and a social worker and lots of other people who are involved would come to that discussion. That's something that you really need a professional to do one-on-one with you to work through all of the details. And then, is there a patient advocate? Sometimes you just need somebody to stand up and speak for you, or help hold your hand while you're speaking, or be with you. I have used a patient advocate to get an appointment when I was told there were no appointments and an appointment was really needed. And that patient advocate opened a door for me for something that was needed. And it wasn't that they didn't want to give an appointment. They were like, our schedule's booked, our hands tied. And I was like, this is really important, and we need somebody to untie your hands. And amazingly, it was the patient advocate. So. And then hopefully it never gets to this, but you can certainly ask what your legal rights are if there's a significant issue, but hopefully you shouldn't be in that situation. And then expanding upon that original set of questions, I actually helped a family create discussion prompts. The family had hired me because after her first birth, she felt very insecure about her ability to advocate for herself. And she said, like, there were some moments where she couldn't find her voice. So she knew the questions to ask. She was actually an attorney. She knew how to advocate for other people, but in that moment of her own birth, she wasn't able to advocate for herself. So we walked through, like, okay, if this is the situation, what do you say? How can you say it? And so I created some of these. They're not necessarily anything that we need to go through completely, but I just wanted to share that there's some prompts, and you can work through beforehand, before a doctor's appointment, say, or a researcher appointment. If you had this question, how would you word it? What would you say? What would you want? And you can write them down. You can literally point to them if you can't get the words out of your mouth. If you're upset, if you're feeling intimidated, you can point to your own questions. I just want to take a moment to pause on these questions. You should all have them in front of you, and for our virtual guests, you can scan the QR code to pull them up if you can't see the questions clearly on your screen. Does anybody want to talk through any of these or have any questions about like how you would have that conversation? No? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. I was just talking, we had this conversation, several conversations during the session, for those of you who went to the sibling conversation, discussion, and for those of you who went to a couple of the other ones, where we were talking about that decisional regret that weighs really heavy on families when they're forced to make a very difficult decision and they're not sure if they made the right one, or they make a decision with the best information that they have and the outcome wasn't what they had hoped for. They did not achieve the goal that they were looking for. Yes, please.
So, have you ever seen where you tell somebody, okay, I need to know everything you're going to do because I want to make you more consent?
Yes.
See, like, doctors or something like, oh, great, we just, you know what I mean, like, we don't have time for this. Is that?
The question was, do you ever start advocating for your informed consent needs and find that the doctors are blowing off or that they're not giving you the time? Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I wrote a lot of these down, so that it's something that a document you can literally share with a clinician who's not on board, or who's not understanding why you have so many questions or why you're requiring or requesting more than they're used to giving. And so to have them written down can really help you advocate for yourself, because it's a very common situation. And it's not that there's good players or bad players or the evil clinician. It's either that they're not trained in it, they don't have time right now because they're feeling the pressure of the full waiting room, or they're all the other things that are going on, or maybe they didn't anticipate your questions and so they're not prepared to answer them. And it's very casual to be like, oh yeah, just reschedule another appointment. But in these clinics, it might be 6 or 8 months, or maybe you traveled, and so it gets really hard to have those conversations. And so what I like to do, especially if you're going to have a lot of questions, is to write them down in advance, your very specific questions, and also maybe share them in the portal before your appointment if you're available. Say, these are the things I want to talk about at our visit, so that they're prepared when they walk in and they can stay on target too. They know what is important to you, and they can stay on task and keep it within the appointment time. Same thing if we can expand outside of medical. Many of us who've had children in school that have various needs, like maybe you need an IEP or a 504 accommodation, and you have those really sometimes contentious meetings with the staff of the disability committee, and you can also do that before your meeting. Say, like, I know you've only scheduled an hour for this meeting. This is what I want to talk about. This is what our priorities are. If you spend the first 30 minutes of the appointment reading, legal required documents to me, we're only going to have a half an hour to talk. So I've read them already. I waive them. Move on. This is important. Let's go. Where you'd kind of take control of the meeting and have everybody on board. So that's what I would recommend for that. But it's a very common occurrence, and that's why it's also really nice too to bring somebody with you if you have the ability. And again, I know when I'm making these recommendations that they don't necessarily fit with your life. Maybe you can't travel with somebody because it's cost prohibitive to bring another person. But if possible, to have somebody to take notes or to remind you of your goals or your questions. Yes, please. So you're saying that they held a meeting about you without you? Yes. That sometimes that does happen in the sense of like they don't even want to give you an option to consider if it's not going to be something that you would be eligible for, that you're, you know. But I think that in that situation, it seems like perhaps you should have been part of the conversation beforehand or involved. So you knew it was happening, at least. Okay. Would you have wanted to participate in the initial meeting? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's and actually, these conversations are starting to get more detailed, so I would love to have a microphone so everybody can hear you. I don't want to recap exactly what you said. Is there a microphone that we could share for this participant? If you just want to recap a little bit. I heard what you said, but I just want to make sure everybody else heard you.
My child had deep brain stimulation surgery 2 years ago, and when we went with a surgical group that was going to do it at University Hospital, we had to see the doctors who thought, yeah, this is a good idea, this is probably beneficial, this will be great, but then it had to go through the hospital's bioethics committee before we could move forward. And we weren't included in that. That was just the committee making that decision, yes or no. And then she also had to have a neuropsych eval done without me present to determine if she was cognitively aware enough to understand what they were talking about doing to her brain. She was 16. So, but they did decide yes. I don't know what we would have done if they'd said no.
Right, no, and that's a really great question. So in some cases, the family is absolutely present at these meetings, and in some cases, they're not. Oftentimes, if you know about them in advance, you can still request to attend, even if they hadn't specifically invited you. And if they decline your attendance, you have the right to know why. What are they going to be discussing that you can't be present? Because they're talking about you. So it's a very reasonable thing to want to be there. It's also a very reasonable thing for you to advocate for yourself or for your child in a way that nobody else in that room can do. So they're looking at charts or they're waiting on somebody to summarize what the situation is and without you there to speak. So I personally would have loved to have you there if I was on an ethics committee. That's a very, that complicates everything. And you'll see when I have examples of, like, when we kind of work through what this feels like, you'll see that I picked an extremely not complicated example to practice because everything related to ethics, and especially with children and everything, it's so deeply complicated. You could get a PhD in just pediatric ethics or research ethics. I mean, it's such a deeply nuanced, complicated field, but you should still be you should be the central player in anything that involves you. But let's do some practice. But before we do that, I wasn't sure if we were going to have enough time for practice, so I did have this as the potential for my end slide, which is I want for everybody in this room, whatever your decision is for your child, to make peace with it when you make it. What I don't want to hear is that decisional regret that we were talking about in multiple other sessions. And it's so common with parents. You're trying so hard to make these unbelievably complicated decisions for another person, and you're doing it with the best of intentions and the best information that you have at the time. And then sometimes information changes, or sometimes you didn't achieve the goal you were hoping for, or sometimes things happen and you have regret. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Why did I consent to that? What was I thinking? And so one of the things that I really like, the idea of, is to write yourself a letter. Write yourself a letter right now. You're making that decision. You decided to do this intervention. There are risks that you know. You've talked through the risks. You talked through the benefits. You talked through the alternatives. And in this space, sometimes their alternatives are nothing. There's nothing else you can do. This is your only chance. This is the only thing that could potentially help. How do you make a decision with that? How unbelievably heavy is that to make that decision for another person? And so to write yourself a letter, say, dear future self, I made this decision. This is why. This is what I was thinking. It was the right choice for our family at the time. Forgive yourself if later on you say, I wish I hadn't done that. Because that decisional regret and that hanging on to feelings of maybe I made the wrong decision can prevent you from moving forward in your healing or help you move forward in your care of your child. If you're sitting there stuck on a decision, it could impact your future decisions because now you're hesitant or you have regret. So just giving yourself permission. I would love to open the floor to other various, whatever questions or concerns you have. I want to make sure that I achieved my goal in this presentation of giving you confidence in language. And so if I haven't achieved that goal yet, I want to have that conversation to make sure that I put out what I wanted to put out for you. If there aren't questions, I do have some exercises we could do together, but I really just want to open up the floor. So if others want to share, please do. Yes, please, let's get you a microphone because I want to make sure everybody can hear you. Is there Ellie, can you run and go? Can we please have a microphone here? And thank you so much for participating. I feel like we all learn from each other. Questions and lived experience that you have, I may not have included.
Okay, so I have many times been asked about signing a DNR for Luke. And my fear is, it makes sense
Sure.
because he is, doesn't communicate and doctors have been like, really, would you want to extend his life? Would you want to do, but I think if I said yes, a DNR, and then I'm in the emergency room, I don't think I could do it. I would want to change my mind.
Right.
Can you change your mind? Or is it like you really can't once you put that in place?
You can change your mind. You can give consent or you can revoke a DNR, but you may not be the person who's there. What if it, if it was with, so if you're not feeling comfortable, I'm gonna go backwards. Sorry. If your intuition is telling you that this is not the right decision for your family, then that's the answer, right? You've made your answer. Because you can always choose to say, no interventions at this point later on, and you could have social work or ethics come in and guide you in that situation. But if it doesn't feel right to have it, then you could talk in advance. You could make an appointment with social work and say, these are my concerns. This is my fear about signing this document. Is it founded? What are my options? If I do this, what am I giving up? If I change my mind, how do I revoke it? How complicated? You can have that conversation in advance, but somebody else handing you that document and sharing their goals of let's not cause more suffering, let's not extend something. Their goals may not be aligned with your goals, and if you're the caregiver, if your son doesn't have capacity to make his decisions and you are the person making those decisions, then you have to be at peace with them. And your intuition is telling you it doesn't feel right, so the answer for you is not now.
Right.
Not no forever,
Right.
not now. Or I need more information. So if you go back to those questions, I need another conversation. I need to talk to a different specialist. I need to engage with somebody else to answer my questions because right now I don't feel good about it.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. And actually, that's one of the ones, we didn't really go through all of them, but if you look at, I'm going to step over here for a second. Should have brought one up with me. Excuse me for 1 second. I just want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly for those of you who are questioning. But one of the questions is, could I speak to somebody from a different specialty? Thank you. If you go down towards the end, let's see, are all of my care providers in agreement? Is anything preventing somebody from being heard? Like, your nurse is feeling one thing, but maybe doesn't feel like they can speak up because the doctor's in the room and you want to talk to somebody privately. I'd like to request a consultation with bioethics, but also, I'm trying to see where exactly it is on this list, but can I have a different opinion? Oh, I'm sorry, it's under confidence. The confidence one says, I know that medicine is sometimes imprecise. How confident are you in this opinion? Is there another way to assess it? Would another provider with your credentials likely have a different opinion? And then here's the other one. Would another type of provider likely have a different opinion? So I'm talking to you as the neurologist from your experience, your looking at it through your neurology lens. What if I talk to palliative care? What if I talk to rehab medicine? What if I talk to social work? Are they going to give me a different opinion? Are they going to give me different guidance? And sometimes I'd be like, no, everybody's all on the same page, and that's when you can call for an ethics consultation. In the situation over there with the deep brain stimulation, that was a research or an intervention ethics committee to decide if it was even ethical to allow that to happen. But sometimes you just have a one-on-one consultation. You call the on-call 3 in the morning bioethicist, and somebody will sit down with you in the room, wherever you are, and have this conversation with you. It doesn't have to be a big committee. The big committees are for research. The big committees are for major, heavy decisions where lots of opinions are needed. But sometimes you just need to talk to one person, and that person is available at many, if not all, major medical centers if you're in that situation. That's a great question. Thank you for participating. Hi, Rob. Yeah.
Hey, Melody.
Hi.
I was wondering if, so Rob Goldstein-Mahan from Ionis, and this is really helpful, and I'm glad that this conversation is happening. I was wondering if you could add on some thoughts or some pointers from this, more on the research side. Like, we use terminology in trials around informed consent a little bit differently, and with so many advancements in leukodystrophy clinical research today, I think maybe the community could benefit by hearing your thoughts and experiences about that in addition.
No, I really appreciate it. And when we first prepared the slides, it was with the intention of keeping it just a really basic introduction to having those conversations. But you're right, this community is absolutely going to be engaging in more and more research efforts. Originally, ULF had asked me to kind of hold that and do it as a separate webinar. But I'm happy to just sort of basically talk about it. It's something that will be talked about more. It's more nuanced. It's much more complicated. But we certainly can talk about the basic. Is there a particular area that you think would be really helpful to address? Yeah. Right. That's a really great question, and I think part of it depends on the purpose of the original visit. So if they're, in a clinical visit and the doctor casually mentions like, oh yeah, we've got 2 more minutes, but by the way, there's this research study you might be eligible for, there's some rush. Or like you said, and it's a real thing, sometimes there genuinely is a rush. There's 1 spot left in this clinical trial, your kid's eligible, take it or leave it. And that's a real thing, and it's as much as I would like to say, take your time. Maybe that's not a reasonable option. And so that's where that very first question, and again, it wasn't written for research. Like we need to sit down with ULF and the community and come up with leukodystrophy specific research and clinical questions. And I look forward to being part of that if I'm invited. But is this emergency? Do we have time to talk? But then also, is it on this one? Oh yeah, let's wait. It says, I'm not comfortable with this decision right now. How long can we delay? And in this case, it was how long can we safely delay? I don't want Pitocin in childbirth. How long can I have before I have to make a decision? Like, baby's okay, mom's okay, we're good. In a situation of research, there is that sense of urgency. There is that sense of potentially, and so just finding out, like, is this really urgent? Do I have a day? Do I have a week? Do I have an hour? What do I have? Don't put me on the spot right now. How much time do I have? And then also, can you start something and pull back? Can you say, like, there's only 1 spot left in this clinical trial. I want to offer it to you. I know this is a heavy decision. Let's start the enrollment process, but the intervention won't happen for a week, so you can start the conversation and get the ball rolling with the understanding that up until this point, you can pull back. Not that we want to waste your time in the pharmaceutical with having somebody unenroll, but if that's what they need to feel good about it and to be a willing participant, because in the clinical trial world, if that person has regret, they may pull out. Now you have a dropout in your trial and nobody benefits from that. Somebody lost a spot, the pharmaceutical company. nobody benefits from that. So it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that everyone's feeling good. For the clinicians in the room, it's in your best interest to make sure that the families feel comfortable with their decision, if not just for the ethical reasons, for legal reasons. There's well documented that you're far less likely to be sued for malpractice, even if something goes wrong, if the patient feels comfortable with the decision that was made. So we all have our motives. I would hope that we're all wonderful and altruistic and patient-centered, but if you need other motivation, having that informed consent conversation benefits everybody. So maybe from the pharmaceutical side, if you could have a timeline that you could share with the clinicians or whoever's recruiting for you, like from first contact to first intervention is this amount of time in this period. This is the last place to withdraw before you've crossed a line. Like that might help take away some of the urgency of the decision making, but still allowing people to take advantage of a finite resource. So that's my gut feeling, but let's add that. Let's keep this conversation going. Cynthia, please be in this conversation. Let's keep this conversation going and plan the next webinar to talk about what the research differences are for the leukodystrophy community specifically. Other thoughts or questions? We have just a few more minutes if anybody, or if there's any online questions or thoughts. I feel like I'm the only thing keeping you from lunch, so I do not want to be that person. Well, then I'm going to put back, before we close up, I'm going to put back to the slide, because I think that if somebody walks into this room and heard nothing else, this slide would be great. But I do actually, we have 3 minutes. I'm going to take one of them, just for a quick practice. I was going to say, like, thinking about the differences for goals when you're considering your benefits, risks, and other assessment. Here's a totally unloaded, should I plant a tree in my yard? Lots of factors to consider, but depends on my goal. If my goal is shade, then maybe I have the alternative of an umbrella, and I don't need the hassle of bringing birds and squirrels and acorns and leaves into my yard, and maybe that's it. If my goal is to feel more connected with nature, then a metal umbrella is not going to be a reasonable alternative, but maybe some houseplants would be. So just sort of taking a really easy example like this and processing the idea of, like, okay, if I change this goal, how does that change my assessment? That can help you really just get comfortable with the process. And the more comfortable you are with the process, the easier it will come when you're in a decision-making moment. So I know that planting a tree is not anything close to what the families in this room are processing, but it can help you practice getting the idea, getting that confidence, and getting the language to have those informed consent discussions with your providers or your children's providers. So then I will go back to the slide to leave it for anybody who walks in the room. If there's not any other questions, I thank you for your time. One other thing, I'm going to be sitting right there for lunch. If anybody wants to keep this conversation going, or if anybody would like to ask a private question, please join me for lunch. I'm right next to Ellie. Can you raise your hand? Please join me. Thank you.